So thanks everyone for joining us today. We're really excited to kind of talk to you a little bit about communication efficiencies and how technology can kind of help you guys out. The most exciting thing for us today is that we have Sarah with us. Sarah has been with us for a long time in her practice, DeMera Allergy. So I'll let Sarah kind of introduce herself here.
Thanks so much, Julian. So I am excited to be here with everyone and to talk about our journey, highlight some key points as to why we chose to go with Klara. And our practice is a growing practice. We started out with one provider. Now we have 4 providers in our office, and we're looking to grow and to continue to scale. So Klara has been a pivotal resource and partner for us in growing and scaling our business. So I'm happy to share our experience with you guys today. So yeah.
Great. Always a pleasure to have you with us. So thanks again, Sarah, for being here. Quick introduction for me. My name is Julian Black. I'm the Director of Sales Enablement at Klara. I'll also obviously be your moderator for today's webinar. And for folks who are new to Klara, very briefly put, we consider ourselves a conversational patient engagement platform. And so that means on top of all the kinds of patient engagement automations and scheduling and appointment reminders and paperwork and all that sort of stuff, we also have a very robust and kind of well-supported two-way communication functionality. We'll get a little bit deeper into kind of how those things work in general and how they can kind of assist with the kind of day-to-day operations in the practice. So before we kind of jump into the details here, I just want to give everyone a quick kind of agenda overview so you know what to expect. This webinar should take us about 45 minutes to get through. And so we want to spend the first 30 minutes just kind of illustrating and talking a little bit about the very common kind of challenges that arise from sort of inefficient communications, why communications are inefficient, and then look at sort of, again, how technology like patient engagement and like patient communication platforms can kind of relieve some of those pains. And then I think probably the most interesting thing that we'll be doing here is kind of involving Sarah a lot in the discussion and talking about sort of, the state of things in her practice before they started adopting technologies like this, and then sort of what the impact of that has been. And then, of course, if there's time, and there should be at the end, we always love to do a little audience Q&A. So if you have questions or things that you'd like to kind of pose to the brain trust here, if you look down at the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A button that has kind of 2 chat bubbles. So if anything occurs to you at any time, you can go ahead and push that button and type it in there, and then we can sort of collect those questions and go through them at the end. All right, so that's the agenda. And without further ado, we'll kind of jump into things here and talk kind of high level about the challenges, the communication challenges that are of issue currently. So an interesting thing to point out, these numbers, by the way, come from Vanguard Research Institute, and they do a lot of sort of consumer market research and things like this. It's very expansive, sort of big studies. So a couple of years ago, they were looking at specifically at the patient as a customer, I think was the title of the study. And one of the interesting things they found is that, looking at all sort of patient feedback, patient complaints, and that's off, the websites, Google and Yelp and Healthgrades and all those sorts of places. It's also looking at, NPS scores, internal patient feedback scores. Of all the things that people complain about, it's very rarely having anything to do with their care or the procedures. Overwhelmingly, 96% of those complaints are specifically about sort of customer service, and the majority of those customer service complaints are about communication. And this is kind of why, and this probably isn't news to anybody, is, this is sort of what the situation looks like. The things that people are complaining about, having trouble getting through, being on hold, showing up and, not having paperwork completed or long wait times. Those are pretty typical complaints we all hear a lot. And, why do we get those complaints? This is sort of the state of what sort of limited tech stack exists for practices to communicate. Typically, you got phones, you got voicemail, you got some email, and unfortunately, despite everybody's best efforts, those just aren't very strong tools. They're not very efficient tools to kind of deal with all of this communication that has to happen. And so those sort of lead to these issues. I think these are important numbers to know. And I think the reason is it's really easy to describe these issues as being frustrating and sort of leave it at that. The hold queue goes on forever. We don't get a lunch break. Patients are complaining. They're saying we didn't reach out to them. We in fact reached out 3 times and sent 2 emails. Those things are all very frustrating, but they do have really significant impacts on the bottom line and on the health of the business. And sort of understanding some of these numbers helps to kind of illustrate sort of how deep the issue goes. 13% of calls in healthcare industry are abandoned. So those are the folks who are sitting on hold and they're on a lunch break and they just say forget it and they hang up. 34% of calls are missed by the average practice. So whether that's just a call that's never answered or a call that goes to voicemail, and then again maybe they abandon that voicemail. And then 85% of potential patients don't even leave a voicemail. So I know a lot of practices are trying to turn away from it. But even, if calls are being transferred to the back and there's maybe a voicemail that picks up while providers are busy, most folks just sort of hang up on the recording. And the big issues there, other than sort of patient experience, all of these numbers reflect, scheduling opportunities. It's revenue opportunities that are being missed because the phone is just not a really great way to deal with busy communications. Just high level, there's some other sort of snowball effects of this. Staff waste a lot of time. Specifically, if you just look at phone tag, it's always an interesting one to put a dollar amount on because people typically don't. And even if this is a big number, I mean, these come from our clients, but even if it's an hour a day and you've got 4 or 6 people, making phone calls to patients, if that equals 4 to 6 hours of paid time a day, where really nothing's getting done, you're just kind of hoping a patient picks up and they don't. Even that one thing, can start to be really expensive. We all know patients leave bad reviews when they can't get through or when they think they can't get through. That's going to drive up customer acquisition costs. And patients leave. Patient attrition tends to be pretty high across the board. And one of those sort of breaking points, and again, this is cited pretty heavily in that Vanguard study, is that when patients feel like they can't get in touch, they sort of move on to the next place. So that's kind of the high level of the issue. And I want to pull Sarah back up on the screen here and sort of have her talk a little bit about how these things looked at her practice. So Sarah, if you could talk to us a little bit about, before adopting a patient communication platform, what kind of challenges were you guys seeing around, communications and that sort of thing?
So we were seeing a lot of the similar things that you just went over. I'm over here thinking to myself, yes, 100% across the board. We had high call volumes, which resulted in increased number of missed calls, voicemails, just a lot of frustration across the board with staff and also with patients. And it was getting to a point where, what do we do? And not only that, but telehealth. You throw telehealth into the mix of things and it just blew up the situation even more so. So it was very, very painful. Are we 100% perfect right now? No, but are we better than where we were a couple of years ago? Absolutely 100%.
Yeah. So were you experiencing, did you actually get the feedback from patients that they're saying, for example, complaining about hold times, maybe complaining about just general accessibility issues, trying to book appointments, that sort of stuff?
Yes, we had. So think about it this way. If your call volume is extremely high, from my perspective, that tells me that your over-the-counter front desk volume is just as high as well. So if you have multiple providers, you have patients that are coming in, you have, providers seeing patients all at the same time. So you can have 4 to 6, 8, however many patients coming up to that front desk at one time. And then on top of that, you have your phone. If you don't have a front office and a back office, you have front people that are mainly focusing on that intake, and then that back office taking those phone calls. If you don't have that, then you are going to have a front office that is going to feel like they are drowning and struggling. So for us, we had a lot of patients complain because, here they are coming into the office, and I have, a receptionist that's on the phone and says, with you in just a moment, have a seat. 5 minutes go by because Mrs. Jones on the phone is telling her life story. And then that starts to put the providers behind, and then there's that trickle effect that goes into back office and clinical, and it just slows the entire process down. And so we had patients that were complaining about that wait time in office on top of calling in. If I'm on the phone with Mrs. Jones, that is as sweet as can be, and I'm trying to hurry along the phone call, and then as I'm on the phone with her for the first 3 minutes, I've already had 2 calls come through and missed. Some leave a voicemail, others don't. And so that balance was really, really hard to keep. And being in business, it's hard to find good staff these days. So when we do find someone good, it's almost as if we are trying to do our best to keep them. But on top of that, this is what you have, we're doing our best to serve them. So for us, the patients, we had a patient that, unfortunately, we had a situation where a patient had called and called and called multiple times. Historically, we can look back and say, okay, yeah, they did call, we did return calls, but that phone tag. And she happened to be somewhat of a close friend to the doctor and sent him a text message. And let's just say that didn't end very well. But again, it was one of those wake up calls that says, we have a problem, we need to change it. What are we going to do? And so Klara has been one of those solutions to help remedy that problem. And it really has helped quite a bit.
So I'm hearing this challenge is pretty common, where it's not just that there's a lot of people coming in the office and waiting. It's not just that there's a lot of people calling in, but it's the same folks who handle both of those scenarios. And so you get, that common issue where both are happening at once. And it's like, do I put the phone on hold, or do I put this person on the door on hold? When it comes to the follow-up calls, like those people who leave messages while you're both on the phone and greeting a patient, and then just like the regular sort of stuff you need to go outbound with.
Sure.
When do you find the time to do that? Or are there certain tools before Klara or before any of these other sort of communication tools? Is that just another thing you're trying to shoehorn into a lunch break?
Sure. Yeah. So the one tool that I think is common across the board that I absolutely hate are sticky notes. Sticky notes everywhere. Patient called, left a message, wrote it on a sticky note, gave it to someone. That note is, once it leaves your hands, you have no idea where that goes. And so it turned into this, well, I took the message and I gave you a sticky note, and the person's like, okay, well, that doesn't help me now. What's going on?
Yeah.
And again, best practice has always been in our legacy system, patient called, you document the conversation, add any notes, and it goes into their chart, so on and so forth. When we transitioned into Emma, there were a few features that we liked in our legacy system that we utilized quite a bit that wasn't readily available in Emma, and that being one of them, to where we can kind of have a running dialogue as to what's going on in communications with the patient, so that if I'm out of the office and I have someone step in for me for a few days, they're not left clueless as to what's happening.
Right, trying to pick up the pieces. Yeah,
exactly. So it's interesting that Klara fills in that pain point. We have it to where we're able to document not only that, but group into internally to other people to be part of the conversation, or to pass off, or to be like, hey, can you follow up on this? Things like that. Another thing is we would have staff that they would leave even just on their lunch breaks and come back and they have 20 voicemails. And if you can imagine each voicemail being 1 to 2 minutes long, depending on what your position is, going through, listening to them, having to write it down. And then in between that, you have inbound calls coming in as well. So it's getting pulled, you had people coming in, like it was really, really difficult. So having the ability to have Klara pick up some of these calls, and if a patient does leave a voicemail, it transcribes it. So it allows us to read the message and actually see it a little bit faster versus having to dial into my voicemail, listen, replay it, delete it, on to the next. Saves so much time, so much time.
Yeah, sounds like it would, especially with, nobody ever repeats their phone number when they leave a casual voicemail. Last question here, and then we can sort of move on to the next section. But and we were kind of mentioning this in the slides. These things are all very frustrating, and patients are complaining. How obvious is the impact there on the health of the business? Like, are you seeing for sure we have scheduling opportunities dropping off the line, or we have patients who are upset and then we don't see them again, or then we see a bad review pop up? Did you see stuff like that?
We did. We saw a decline in patient care just across the board, being able to get back to the patient, making sure that they have what it is that they need. A ton of double work on our end as well. I would say it was a huge impact to where we lost business, right? And one bad review, that's a high price to pay. And for us, a lot of our referrals are verbal referrals from friends, family, things like that. And so you risk that, and one person says one bad thing, and before you know it, it's 10 people that could have potentially been a patient and now no longer is, because they heard, oh, DeMera, you may want to go somewhere else. It was a bad experience for so-and-so.
Yeah, I think that's pretty common. Well, excellent information. And again, for folks who just joined recently, we will have a Q&A at the end here. So if there's any questions that you have while Sarah's kind of explaining things, there's a little Q&A button you can hit at the bottom of the screen. If you put your question there, we should be able to address that at the end here. So let's kind of jump into the next section here. And talking a little bit about how technology can start to address some of these issues. And so one of the big things, of course, is being able to put automations in place. And on the automation side, what you're really thinking about is outbound. You're thinking about that outbound activity, all the times where you need to call a patient back because they left a message. But you're also thinking about being able to preempt a lot of the inbound. So obviously, we don't have to manually make an appointment reminder or manually request someone reschedule their missed appointment. But we can also preempt things like being able to get instructions and scheduling flows in front of patients before a visit. Be able to touch on recall and just get out and explain things, answer questions, get forms to people before they come inbound asking about it. Why you start to feel like this is impactful financially. Busy work costs physicians about 50 grand a year each. And what you see is that the vast majority of the actual working time for most physicians in private and group practice, about 70%. Is going to be spent doing paperwork, doing administrative work, doing follow-ups. So these are all things, if we're talking about 50 grand a year, it's an obvious big number, 20 plus hours a week. These are the kinds of things you want to be able to alleviate with technology. So the other sort of comeback here is, another way that automation is great. But the other thing that you want to do is sort of eliminate this thing where the patient calls you and then you need to get that message to someone else. And now you're jumping into email, or you're jumping into a Post-it note, as Sarah was describing, or somebody goes online and requests an appointment and that goes to an email, but then you need to call them. Maybe the workflow is to go into your EHR and make a note there. So there's just all these disparate systems, and people are trying to communicate in all these different ways, and none of them are really connected. And so with technology like a Klara, the idea is to try to be able to streamline all of that. So there's really just one thing, whether, whether it's an automation or it's a live question or it's internal collaboration between team members, there's just sort of one screen, one flow that people are having to use. to get through that stuff. To talk a little bit in detail about what you can potentially do with automations, the really important piece, at least for our system in particular, is you want these automations to be very customizable. You don't want a situation where you've got one kind of cookie cutter, this is the message we send, and it gets sent 7 days ahead of time. You want it to be for this particular appointment, when it's this provider and when it's at this location, this is exactly what we want to send and when we want to send it. When you can do that, when you can be that specific, now you can really not just alleviate one use case, but it really becomes like having, additional full-time outbound employees working for you, because you can be so sort of unique and specific for every situation that you want to send material to patients about. And again, if we just go a little bit more granular on what it means to kind of streamline things, if everything's coming and going from the same place, if the patient looks in the same place for everything that they're going to do with you, in the virtual, whether it's telemedicine appointment or signing a form, whatever it needs to be. And if staff is always looking in that same place when the questions come in and when people need clarification on things, you're able to set up these just very straight lines, where the only time you're really doubling back is just in the case that, somebody doesn't show up to an appointment and automatically we ask them to reschedule, and then it just dumps them right back into the top of that flow. But that's kind of the one and only flow, and there isn't a need to sort of break off or go into other platforms. And a lot of that just speaks to usability. That's what patients need in order to adopt things. So again, let me get Sarah back up here, and we'll talk a little bit about your experience with this sort of stuff. So maybe you can give us some examples of how your practice is using Klara right now to streamline communication and maybe deal with some of those issues we were mentioning earlier.
Sure. And two things that I want to talk about specifically. One is telehealth. Utilizing Klara for telehealth has been phenomenal. It's been a great process. We can have medical assistant get the patient all set up and ready to go, and then have the provider go into their room and join into the conversation, and it's there. Once the provider's done, if there's a follow-up or things that need to be done, provider can hop out of that call, MA can hop back in, take care of everything, and move on with their day. So that has been a huge help versus, like with Emma, they do have a telehealth, but it requires the patient to download an app, to have a username and password. With Klara, you send a link and that's it. And the beautiful part is that, let's just say it's a child that has an appointment and both parents want to be part of the conversation because they're going over some important test results or things like that. And the beautiful part is that both parents can be part of the conversation with the child and the doctor, and be one at work, one at home, and wherever else the child's off at school. We've had multiple times to where it's a college student that both parents wanted to be a part of that. Mm-hmm. So that's been a huge thing for us to be able to have that flexibility to allow people to be part of the conversation. The other one was a pain point that we had, was specifically for inbound referrals for new patients. Our legacy system, we had a decent workflow that allowed us to keep track of, our first, second, third call attempts, who were scheduled, no responses, things like that. So we were able to run some reports and have a really good heartbeat as to what our new patient coordinators were doing and where these referrals were coming from. When we switched over into Emma, that doesn't exist. There wasn't anything that was there, and I wasn't aware of that. And granted, when you're transitioning from one system to the other, there's so many higher level things that you're focusing on. And so when you start to really get into some of these workflows in various departments, you don't recognize that might be missing. So when it came time to for that switch over, and our new patient coordinators were, what do we do? How are we keeping track of this? And to my benefit, I had been a new patient coordinator prior. I knew the position very well. So the learning curve for me to start figuring out and troubleshooting was relatively quick, but it took me some time to think about, okay, what resources do we have? what can we do? What does the system allow for? And it was like an aha moment that it was like, Klara, oh my gosh, we can do this. And so I just started understanding what Klara has the ability to do. I was like, okay, this is how we can do it. We're going to do this, 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 you know, and to be able to map it out, take a workflow that worked, and to be able to recreate it in using Klara and Emma, just game changer. And the beautiful part about that is that we went from doing all paper forms, mailing them out, and taking that intake forms across the desk, scanning them in, and all of that. And with that one change, because Emma didn't have a solution for that, but Klara did. Klara took it from here to where we were able to eliminate all the paper forms. We're able to get financial policies signed before that first initial visit. We had copies of the insurance cards that before was always a struggle. So it took that pain point that we didn't realize that we had until we had Emma, and gone. It's no longer a pain point. Is it perfect? Yeah, there's maybe a few things that we want to adjust here and there, but does
Sure.
it get the job done, and is it efficient? Absolutely, 100%.
That's great. Yeah, that's great. And the especially with the kind of tracking and reporting that you can kind of and have kind of bundled into the workflows that you're creating. I think that sort of business intelligence stuff's really important. How about the sort of the impact of just the basic, secure messaging in terms of staff productivity and like being able to kind of migrate communications away from the phones, maybe away from the hold lines? Have you seen that be impactful with your sort of staff morale and with, patient sort of outcomes and satisfaction?
It's growing. I should say that one of the biggest challenges has been training the patient, training the customer to not pick up the phone and dial in, but that they can communicate with us here as well. Those that are younger generations, some of these newer moms and dads that are coming into the practice with their kids, they pick up on it quick. They like the text message. They like to be able to have that quick communications. We do have an older demographic as well that struggle with it, but there are, those grandparents that show up that completely surprise you, that, they whip out their smartphones and they know exactly what they're doing. The messaging has been critical. I know for myself, I'll go through and just kind of get a heartbeat as to what's going on. I get reports every day as to what users are utilizing Klara, getting some stats and things like that. And so I can go in and check work, and if there's something that comes up that is in question, I can internally communicate with that employee and within that patient's dialogue chart, where the patient doesn't have to see it. It's all internal within us, and to be able to take care of those things, and vice versa. We can send things out to each other. So that has really helped with efficiency and making sure that things don't get forgotten about, because that has been a huge pain point. Is, oh, I forgot, or oh, I thought I sent it to you, but it never was really sent.
Yeah, so that sort of things like having read receipts. I know a lot of people talk about training their staff to, each staff member can use their own Klara inbox as like a task list and just kind of focus on that. How you found that to be kind of a similar,
yes, yeah, very similar
for you guys?
And we've also created different inboxes for various types of communications. Like, for example, with our new patient referrals, or doing forms specifically, we send out forms to a patient. That patient gets assigned to an inbox so that we can then follow up with the patient within a couple of days to make sure that they're getting their forms done. Once they've completed that, we close it out. So we've been able to utilize the inboxes for that particular flow to kind of keep track as to who's where and what they're currently working on at that time.
Yeah, and just one more quick question. You mentioned, the younger patient demographics, the kind of like millennial parents and stuff, no problem. Older patients don't adopt at as high a level, which is pretty typical for everyone and every technology. Have you found that, if you can get that population of patients who does adopt has, in other words, are enough people adopting that it's been helpful. It's moving the needle to use messaging. Like if half of our patients adopt, that's great. It's making a big impact. Is that kind of the way things are playing out for you guys so far?
100%. It has been night and day difference. Even though our call volume is still relatively high, our ability to turn around and communicate with the patient is 10 times faster. And people like that. They like to be able to have a quick response. And but again, it's training the patient to get familiar with it, and that takes time. But the more that we utilize it and we drive the patient to this platform, we're seeing an uptick in that dialogue and that communication and patient engagement there.
That's awesome. Great. So I want to keep it moving here because I do want to leave time for Q&A, folks. So what we want to show you next, and we'll keep this brief, is just a little bit of detail about what Klara and ModMed together kind of look like and what sort of functionality is enabled with our integration. I know there's one or two folks that have put questions in that it sounds like you may not just be on ModMed. The short version is that we integrate with many systems. We integrate both with EMA and G-Gastro. So no matter kind of which side of ModMed you might be calling in from today, we have these solutions for both. So just to run quickly through the feature list, automated patient sync, simply put, that's just, patients go from your ModMed EHR into Klara. You don't need to sort of do double data entry to get folks in. And we do sync any changes you make, and those changes are guaranteed uptime of 45 minutes or less. So typically it's pretty much real time. But if you put somebody in, you change their appointment, they won't get the old appointment reminder, that kind of thing. We will get their new phone number if you change it. Automated form and document export. So basically any forms and things, requests for IDs, stuff that you're sending out to patients, when they return those to you, they will export automatically and attach themselves to the patient's chart. Patient self-scheduling. As it sounds, patients are able to self-schedule. And just a quick note here, I know some people, especially very procedure-based, are like, I don't know about self-scheduling. You have total control over this stuff. You don't need to use our self-scheduling. You can opt to only use it for follow-ups and consults. You really have total control over sort of which appointments are available to patients to self-schedule if you do use that feature. All of this pre and post appointment messaging can be automated. We were sort of touching on that previously, but again, whatever information, documents, forms, directions, all those sorts of things that you want sent to the patient before and after the visit can very easily be automated. And again, it can be very different and very specific information and forms and messaging that goes out based on the appointment type, the actual provider, and the location. So it can all be very customizable. We do route messages, which if you're using, a different system, like one of the ones that comes bundled with Emma currently, rather than one big inbox, we do route messages. We have AI assisted message routing. It's powered by Google. They're our sort of big partner in this stuff. So we will not send every message to one giant inbox that you have to sort through. We'll actually send it to the teams that need that message. Scheduling goes to schedulers, billing goes to billers, et cetera. And implementation for us is very easy. It's typically a switch that gets flipped over a weekend. I won't spend too long on this, but talking again about those automated messages, these are sort of all the different kinds of automated messages you can send for each appointment type that you have. You don't have to use them all. You can use 7 of one and 2 of the other and nothing else. Again, each appointment type, each provider, you can customize exactly what you want to use out of this box. But things like getting the paperwork, appointment reminders, of course, pre and post visit instructions. If you're using us for video calls, you can be sending the video visit links ahead of time automatically. If they miss an appointment, we'll engage with them and get them back into schedule. We can collect feedback internally. We can also send folks out to the review sites. And then follow up, can be done right after the visit, and then again in 6 months, sort of, et cetera, and so forth. So you can use this step for recall as well. So just real quick, our sort of newest integration that we're talking about is our integration with ModMed Pay. So if you're using ModMed Pay, or if you have plans to, you can automatically be asking patients to submit their credit card information, to pay their copays, to pay their bills using Klara. So that's another sort of newer automated step. You can also, doesn't need to be automated, you can send that out individually as well. A little bit more detail for you here on the ModMed Pay. I think, we all sort of know that collections in medical is a massive sort of loss industry, and there's a lot of vendors and solutions that exist around it. Obviously, being able to collect credit cards ahead of time, just being able to take that call away from staff and make that be automatic, and also being able to, especially with things like telemedicine, to be able to get those copays up front ahead of the visit, and again have that be an automatic process, does decrease your no-show time because people have already paid, and obviously helps with collections. So again, we'll have our last little bit of Q&A from me to Sarah, and then we can sort of dip in here to what people are asking. But maybe you can talk just really kind of briefly about what you've seen, Sarah, in terms of a benefit of having the integration live.
The integration has been a pivotal game changer for us, in the sense that we have been able to take things that, for example, collecting payments, being able to documentation, forms, it's helped us improve efficiencies across the board, save money, and allow patients to have a positive experience. With the integration, one of the reasons we chose to actually go with Emma is because of our relationship with Klara. So we were actually with our legacy system when we were introduced to Klara, and huge impact. It was great. We didn't do an integration with our legacy system because it wasn't set up for it, but we also were in the works of looking for another solution. And when it came time for getting some referrals and figuring out, okay, we want to know who works with Klara and that integration. And then from that list, we were able to narrow down to Emma. And so with that, we knew that there was growth on the horizon for Klara. There were a lot of things that you guys do now that you didn't do when we first signed up. And it's been amazing to see these updates and these things come through. So for us, we're with Modernizing Medicine because of Klara. It wasn't the other way around. And I know for a lot of people, it's, oh, we're with Emma, then we're with Klara. But we started kind of the reverse.
Yeah, that's interesting. We don't want to toot the Klara horn too much in an educational webinar, but it is a vote of confidence, I think, when someone says they sort of narrowed down their EHR choices to make sure that they wouldn't lose Klara in the process. Yes. So thank you for the compliment.
Yeah, no, it was really important for us, just because we were seeing the value. We knew what the system could do for us, what it was doing for us, and then knowing you guys are really great about what is on your roadmap, what you guys are working on, communicating with your customers, letting us know, and also hearing feedback. That is really important for us to know that, hey, we're having a problem here, or we're struggling with this, and you guys listen, and you're able to then build that into what you guys are working on, and really trying to tailor to our needs. So that was really important for us. We want to be, yep. And we want to have a partner that wants to work and help us be successful, and vice versa.
Yeah, I will say internally, Klara is a company that chooses to make most of its product roadmap decisions based on feedback from existing clients. It's typically more about what the sales team is asking for versus what the client success team is asking for. But I know we're at time here, folks. I want to address, there's a couple of Q&A questions here. Quickly, we're being asked, what's the fee for integration? Do both Klara and Emma charge? So the fee for Klara is dependent on sort of which package you choose and how many providers that you have. Emma does charge per provider, but we factor that into our Emma pricing. So we basically remove the per provider charge from our standard rates. And as I'm sort of answering these, I'm going to share my screen one last time. If you have specific questions for someone at Klara, you can send an email to hello@klara.com. Sarah has offered to make herself available if anyone has specific questions for her. You know, and I'm sure questions along the lines of how'd you handle XYZ are just as valid as, you know, how'd you handle it with Klara. So feel free to reach out to either place. But if you're looking for pricing specific information, we'd be more than happy to give you that if you want to send us a quick email. And lastly, someone's asking if Klara is dermatology specific. No, that is our largest specialty, mostly because when we started, we thought of ourselves as dermatology specific. However, that's 8 years ago. We work with, you know, every specialty under the sun, including, you know, home health care and, you know, anything else that you can come up with. I do notice that there's a couple of existing Klara clients asking some questions. These will be forwarded on to your client success manager, so we will get those addressed for you folks individually. So all of that having been said, I want to first thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much for being with us, and really appreciate your feedback and your insight.
You're welcome. And if I could make comment to two things real quick.
Please.
That's all right. One thing that I am excited about that is relatively new with Klara is being able to partner and integrate and invite industry partners in to work with the practice that may not necessarily be with Klara yet. So those of you that are interested or looking at Klara, that is a huge game changer for us to be able to bring in. We work with Sleep Lab, so to be able to bring them in and they can be part of the patient communication in that journey and have a heartbeat as to what's going on, it has been great. And the self-scheduling, get a QR code, put it on your forms, have it in the rooms, Google, Yelp, website. That has been a game changer for us, to where patients are just going on 8 o'clock at night, you know, they're in bed, they need an appointment, they're not feeling well, they're going on and they're scheduling themselves, and the next morning we're confirming it, and what could have been a 5-minute experience now turned into less than 2 minutes to get that taken care of. So I've highly recommend. So if you do have questions, please reach out. I'd be more than happy to answer any questions and give some personal experience.
Yeah, and again, we appreciate that very much. So everyone, just a quick reminder, this is all getting recorded, and that recording will be emailed out to attendees, so you'll have all of this. If you have questions for Sarah, there is an email where you can reach her. If you have questions for us, there is the hello@klara.com email. And again, thank you everybody for sharing your afternoon with us, and have a great rest of your week.